Thank you, Craig. Yeah, I was first time in Otiave was 14 years ago as an undergraduate, as a matter of fact, and Craig walked into the lab and said, "Hey, I'm going to take you to the Arctic in a week from now." And yeah, and growing up in the tropics, coming up to the Arctic, I just got fascinated and basically hooked into Arctic research. So today I'll be talking about freshwater ecology in this region. And from the picture behind, you can see that freshwater systems are a dominant part of the landscape. When we look at this region from the satellite perspective, we see that over half of these areas is covered by water. When we zoom in between these lakes, we see wetland systems across this drain lake basins, and that are that contain numerous ponds, and which was going to be one of my main focus today in terms of freshwater systems. Some of the early work Todd presented yesterday at the beginning of NARL with Lawrence Irving and Pershel Lander, looking at some of these aquatic invertebrates and the physiology of these aquatic invertebrates. And Matt Butler, who's seen here, actually sampling some of the emergence and the phenology of this invertebrates. Some of his main findings is also how these invertebrates are emerging earlier and earlier in the season, and some contributions in terms of life cycles as well. Most of the main or the most highlight research of this aquatic system happened in 1970s. Jerry Brown did more of the terrestrial part of the Tundra Biome project, but John Hobby led the aquatic or the freshwater part of the IBP, looking at tundra ponds with Javier Alexander, Maroy, Stanley, and others. And I just want to kind of like show you this image, which is pretty impressive. The complexity of the system they had got back in 1970s is studying this, which resulted in one of the most detailed aquatic studies in ponds across the Arctic. And yeah, I mean, you can see here some experimental treatments here, a person suspended across this pond, some other probably experiments here. They also had a pad here to prevent some thawing, and yeah, so anyhow. And since then, things have been changing quite a bit. This image is back 1970s. This is in late 2010s, late 2000s, and where I actually started as a grad student. And one of the main questions is, well, how are these ponds changing over the past 50 years? This historical ponds are actually kind of where the Kaliak Road joins Cake Eater Road here. Vanessa Lockheed, which was my graduate advisor, she, and as far as an NSF funded project, she came back to these sites and resampled these sites to look at the biogeochemistry and biophysical changes over the past 40 years. And she actually hired, it's a little washed out here, but she actually hired an army of undergrads to punch in all these dozens of records and in terms of plant physiology, community, aquatic community assemblages, and many other topics. And what she found was that things are getting warmer in these ponds, about 2 Celsius warmer. Most of these changes are at the beginning of and later in the season. But in addition to increasing temperature, she also saw increasing nutrients and ammonia, nitrate, phosphorus, and that's probably why we also see an increasing chlorophyll and algae in this biomass of these aquatic systems. And this changes in nutrients, they also hold over the season. We also see an increasing dissolved organic carbon, phytoplankton, nitrogen, phosphorus. And in terms of carbon, this system's, this aquatic small but very important in terms of carbon, aquatic systems have some of the highest of this graph shows you the partial pressure of CO2 in the water column, and this system have the highest CO2 concentrations compared to marine and wreckage systems, showing you that these reporting in meters of CO2 to the atmosphere. She was able to model how, based on changes in DOC, how much CO2 has changed in these aquatic systems, which has been quite significant, over probably twice as much as CO2 has increased from this aquatic habitats. And in terms of primary productivity, back in 1970s, the group actually did the whole pond experiments, but we couldn't do that. And we actually did a few experiments looking at benthic algae, the algae that grows on the bottom, phytoplankton, and as well as small mesocosms. So we can actually treat some of these, making small, tiny ponds where we can actually treat these systems and see the responses. And one of the main things, or main findings here, is that we see a change from phosphorus limitation to nitrogen and phosphorus co-limitation. And this is likely associated to this long-term increase in phosphorus in this habitats. In terms of lower trophic levels, we actually see larger, more abundant Daphnia and earlier peak abundance. And basically the timing of the abundance of these invertebrates are, or zooplankton, are at least 10 days earlier, which is also similar to what we're seeing with Bob Hollister was showing in the terrestrial side, how plants are actually green earlier as well, and flowering earlier. I personally was more interested in the morphology and how these ponds are changing over time, and what the implications are for land atmosphere carbon interactions. Some of the findings show that this tundra pond is actually shrinking and disappearing over time, which is pretty fascinating. Over the past 75 years, using historical records, both from aerial imagery as well as actual measurements in the field from 1970s, we're able to track these trends in these ponds. And we see that in terms of numbers, we see a decrease about 15 to 20% decrease in number of ponds. And in terms of area, quite significant, about a third of the size of these ponds have shown. And I mentioned that these ponds are getting warmer, right? And we don't see significant, this graph shows you a transit, and we have transit a lot of these ponds with historical data. And we see that water depth hasn't really changed significantly. However, with increasing temperature, we also see an increase about 10 to 12 centimeters in active layer thickness, which is pretty significant. And one of the I guess the answers why are these ponds disappearing and changing is, can this be attributed to potential evapotranspiration? But the Barrow area is now this is the case. We don't really have evidence for that, since the Barrow area has this very cold, moist air that prevents some of these ponds from drying. And we also don't have much evidence of lateral drainage, but we do see an increasing nutrients, and with increasing nutrients and warmer temperatures, we also see an encroachment of aquatic vegetation. This graph, I apologize, is a little smaller here. It just shows you the trending temperature. This is summer temperature, summer air temperature for Barrow area. And there has been really much changes in precipitation. But vegetation encroachment has huge implications for land atmosphere carbon interactions, since vegetation is who dominates the primary productivity in these aquatic systems. This graph shows you kind of the trends on biomass, kind of the density, but we also we also see an increase in cover on this system. This is back well in the 1970s, and that's me back in 1910, and last year this pond is pretty much almost covered by Arctophila fulva. What I found that this aquatic plays a key role in methane emissions, and they actually add this methane straws. And here it's a side section of Arctophila, and this is a pendant grass. And what he does is uses this gas as flotation, basically to emerge from the bottom of the pond. And however, this plants actually transport most of the methane produced in the bottom of these ponds. There's three main pathways of methane. One is diffusion. When methane is diffused through the water, it gets oxidized, so it gets converted to CO2. However, plants are this pathway where methane is transported from the soils directly to the atmosphere. And I wanted to see what are the implications of increasing cover, increasing biomass, active layer depth, and water depth changes, which is one of the main drivers, and as well as temperature. What are the main drivers of methane over? One of the main drivers of methane in this for these plants. And what I found was over the 40 years. During peak season, we see an increase, about 70% increase of methane emissions across a regional scale, using this high resolution map of these aquatic plant communities. One of these plants only cover 5% of the land, but contribute to approximately 60% of the regional methane fluxes. So we are barely unraveling the importance of these aquatic habitats in the regional carbon budgets. As a summary here, I just kind of made this diagram kind of show you how with increasing warming and temperature over the past recent decades, we see an increase in active layer and permafrost thaw, which is likely contributing to nutrient inputs. And we actually see an increasing biomass of aquatic vegetation, which is also promoting the transfer of methane from the soil into the atmosphere. We also see an increasing DOC, which actually also increases CO2 emissions from open water, further promoting greenhouse gas emissions and potential warming. So this positive feedback loop. In terms of future directions, I just submitted my early career proposal for NSF, and I'm really interested in combining state-of-the-art technology to understand and multi-scale remote sensing to understand this systems better over seasons, and how the evolution of these ponds is influencing regional land atmosphere carbon exchange. Must say that these habitats are also key areas for wildlife and waterfowl, which actually nests, and including some endangered species, so some of the eiders, and which are, I think, critical areas to study in this. So thank you.